Have you ever imagined that a simple getaway could turn into the worst nightmare of your life? Let me tell you about a terrifying experience my girlfriend and I faced during a brutal snowstorm in Vermont. We decided to escape to a secluded cabin in the woods, surrounded only by towering trees and complete silence. One quiet evening, as the music echoed through the air, a shadowy figure suddenly appeared, sending chills down our spines. We realized with growing dread that someone was watching us. As the snowstorm outside intensified, so did our fear. Would we be able to escape this nightmare, or would we pay the price for our naivety? Back before my girlfriend, Julian Mercer, and I officially started dating, we would still hang out all the time. We both snowboard, and her family has a little cabin in Vermont, not far from Stone Mountain Resort. This was around our 10th time hanging out. She invited me to go up there for a weekend of snowboarding together for the first time. It was about a 5-hour drive. As we neared her little house, we spent about half an hour on a very windy, secluded road, occasionally passing driveways that led to properties blocked off by walls of trees. We were way up in the mountains, and by this point, the sight of other cars was quite rare. It really felt like we were alone up there. Many of the driveways didn't even have tire marks in the snow, meaning even a lot of the houses were devoid of people. Julian told me that was because many of the houses here were owned by people out of state, just like her family's situation. I was going about 30 miles per hour when she yelled at me to slow down, saying it was coming up. I hit the brakes, and this little opening in the trees that I would have otherwise missed appeared. We drove down a narrow trail in four-wheel drive, which led to the small house covered in snow. It looked incredibly cozy. We parked, and the first thing we did was turn on the heat in the little house. We unloaded our stuff inside, and since it was already getting dark, we cooked some of the food we had packed for dinner and watched the movie The Pursuit of Happiness. The house had just about everything: heat, electricity, except for running water. Her family had jugs and jugs of water for important things like washing hands and plates, but there was no working toilet. She told me we had to use the outhouse outside. I only needed to pee that night, so I went out to the front deck and peed into the snow. It was also snowing that night. At some point during the second movie, we fell asleep, and we woke up early to our phone alarms. We wanted the freshies on the mountain, so we started getting ready to drive up to the ski resort after breakfast. However, I needed to go out to the outhouse again. I ran out in my shoes, and my feet started to freeze. On my way to the outhouse, I noticed footprints in the snow. They were kind of big, but I couldn't tell if they were boot marks or animal prints. I followed the trail, which actually wrapped around the house and then went into the woods. I called for Julian, and she came to look. She said it was probably a black bear since they are everywhere up here. After that, I took care of my business, and we set off to the ski resort, where we enjoyed a solid 8-hour run. Afterward, we stopped at a diner to eat and then returned to the house. By this point, it was pitch black outside and snowing again. We set up a fire, cranked the heat on full blast, and started playing some music. We began to drink, and eventually, I had to break the seal and pee. Since I was already putting my boots on, I figured I'd do all my business in the outhouse. I ran out into the snowstorm and headed to the outhouse once more. This time, I slammed the door shut to prevent snow and cold air from blowing in my face. I could still hear the blasting music from inside the house, but then, over that, I heard the crunching sound of footsteps in the snow passing the outhouse. "Julian?" I yelled, but there was no answer. The footsteps just walked away. I had brought my phone with me, so I texted her, "Are you outside?" It didn't immediately deliver, though, because my cell reception was terrible up there. A few minutes passed. I was still in the outhouse, just about to finish, when the blasting music suddenly stopped. It was pure silence, except for the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground outside. As soon as I stepped out of the outhouse, I realized it was pitch black out there. The lights from the house were off, and I figured maybe the power had gone out. I used my phone's flashlight and noticed a fresh pair of footsteps in the snow leading to the house. I followed the footsteps to the front door. They seemed to stop and then continue around the house. I banged on the door and yelled, "Julian Mercer." Suddenly, the door opened, and an arm pulled me inside. It was Julian. She slammed the door shut and locked it, whispering that there was a man who had tried to open the door. She had locked it as soon as I went to the outhouse because she was scared to be alone. When she saw the person at the door wasn't me, she cut the power and hid in the corner of the living room, watching in horror as a stranger walked past the living room window, slowly looking inside. I arrived at the door only a couple of minutes after this had happened. Julian told me about the secret cellar in the floor where her dad kept a couple of rifles and a shotgun. Navigating in the dark, I found the handle and lifted it open. Using my flashlight, I climbed down the little ladder and grabbed one of the guns off the wall. We then waited on the couch in the dark, afraid to turn the lights back on and expose ourselves to whoever was out there. The closest neighbors weren't a short walk away, and Julian said it wouldn't have been any of them. Odds were they weren't even in Vermont at that moment. Once again, the only sound was the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground outside until the sickening crunch of footsteps in the snow returned. I took the loaded gun and marched to the front door, opened it, and fired 3 rounds into the air, screaming. The sound of the footsteps faded away. I imagined they ran off, and the echo of the shots masked the sound of their retreat. The next morning, we left under the recommendation of her father, who said it was best not to stay there any longer. They didn't really have anything worth stealing, so we just got the hell out of there. At least we had managed to get our full day of snowboarding in before that horrific night. I live in England, and for those who live here, you may remember that it snowed quite a lot in the winter of 2018. I used to love the snow, but after what happened, I was no longer a fan of it. My immediate family was going to visit extended family in Cornwall for the weekend, but I didn't want to go. I didn't get along with them very well and would much rather have stayed at home. So, I faked an illness, not expecting it to work. But it did. They went without me, leaving me in charge of the house, which I was perfectly fine with. For the record, I was 16, so it wasn't like they were being irresponsible. Saturday was great. I spent the day on my computer, watching Netflix and playing in the snow with my dog. She loved the snow more than anything. That evening, I was just finishing up a mission on Call of Duty World War II when I started to feel hungry. The house was full of food, but mostly things that took a lot of effort to prepare. I decided to head to the fish and chip shop in the village. By now, it was getting dark outside, and though the snow had stopped falling, it had gotten really deep. I grabbed a tinner and shoved it into my pocket before pulling on my coat and heading outside. The route I took involved going down a tree-lined snicket with a few street lamps, providing some light before coming out near the main road where the chippy was located. By the time I got there, it was dark out. I got my order, some chips and a battered sausage, and started to head back home. Halfway down the snicket, clutching my meal, I heard it in the trees just to my right, a twig snapping. My head whipped around, but I couldn't see anything. My heart raced, but I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. Then I heard it again, 2 snaps in rapid succession. Now I was scared. I began to walk home faster, but I forgot about the last section of the snicket, which was almost pitch black. The bulb in the street lamp had blown months ago, and the council couldn't be bothered to fix it. I sighed in frustration and worry as I continued walking, when I heard it again. The continuous sound of twigs breaking stopped for a moment, replaced by crunching footsteps. I stopped and turned around, and my heart sank. I could see a black figure silhouetted by the distant lamp, running straight at me. I turned around and sprinted through the snow. I burst out of the snicket and ran to my house, which was only about 10 meters away. I fumbled for my keys, jamming them into the lock as I approached. As soon as I was close enough, I threw myself into the house and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. I looked out the door window and saw nothing. The streets were deserted. It wouldn't have been so bad if it ended there, but it didn't. Paranoia kept me up late, and close to midnight, my dog started barking and scratching at the back door. I knew deep down what she was barking at, but I didn't want to believe it. I went to the back door, but it was too dark to see anything. I steeled my nerves and flicked the light switch, once again seeing nothing. The back garden was empty. I dragged the dog away from the door and went back to watching TV, but something nagged at me. I couldn't put my finger on it until I realized the back garden was undisturbed, apart from my own footprints leading to the back door from when I came home. That's when it hit me. I came in through the front door. My veins turned to ice as I walked to the back door and stopped dead in my tracks. It was wide open. The layout of my house gave 3 different options when you entered. The living room where I was, the kitchen, or the stairs. As I slowly backed into the wall, I heard a light but clear thump upstairs. Grabbing the dog, I took my phone and ran straight to the neighbors. It was midnight, and I rang the bell about 10 times before getting a response. They were furious about being woken up, but when I told them what was going on, they let me straight in. The police took about 40 minutes to arrive because of the heavy snow, and when they did come, they did a thorough search of the house but found nothing. My footprints in the snow were all filled in, but the CCTV showed a figure running straight out of the back door soon after I left and hopping the fence at the end. They disappeared into the woods behind my house, and it kills me to know that he's still out there and that he knows where I live. I'm sleeping more steadily now, and we have a new lock on the door. For a while, I was constantly worried for my family's safety. I'm 27 years old now, but this happened when I was 26. My mom passed away a few years ago. My dad is blind but sold a very successful energy company when I was young. So we have money and multiple properties that we rent out. Given the circumstances, I help manage most of these properties. My dad lives in a one-story condo about 10 minutes away from us, conveniently within walking distance to the village, where he can access grocery stores and anything else he might need. My sister Katie and I live in the house where we all used to live together as a family. While my dad manages basic tasks like shopping and taking care of himself, we assist him with appointments that require him to travel further, like doctor visits. This incident occurred during a winter storm. Katie was at her boyfriend's house, about half an hour away, so I was home alone. The snow was coming down heavily, and I thought it would be a good idea to check in on my dad. He has a landline phone, which is easier for him to use than a smartphone. He does have a smartphone, but he's stubborn about using it. When I called, it rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I called again, and the same thing happened. Normally, he would rush to the phone whenever we called. I waited a few minutes before trying once more, but again it went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back. Worried, I called Katie to see if Dad mentioned going out in the blizzard. When she said no, my anxiety heightened. I didn't like the thought of him being out in such terrible weather, so I drove over to his condo. The roads were so bad that hardly any cars were on the road. My phone kept vibrating with winter storm advisory warnings. These conditions were not suitable for my dad to be out walking around in. As I pulled up to his condo, I noticed footprints in the snow going both ways, indicating he must have gone out and just gotten home. I knocked on the front door and yelled, "Dad, it's me." A few seconds later, the neighbor's wife, an elderly woman named Hannah Laura, opened her door with a smile. She informed me that her husband had just given my dad a lift to the store a few minutes ago. We chatted for a moment before I thanked her and headed inside my dad's condo to wait. Naturally, I tried looking for my key, but to my disappointment, the door opened when I twisted the doorknob. My dad had left the door unlocked again. I had told him so many times to stop doing this. One day someone might break in, even though we live in a nice area. I shut the door behind me but then noticed something peculiar. There were melted snow tracks on the wood floor leading past the living room into the little hallway that led to my dad's room. "Dad," I called out. He must have just gotten home before I arrived. But that wouldn't explain why Hannah Laura's husband hadn't returned yet. Maybe he dropped my dad off and then ran his own errands. As I slowly followed the tracks, I called out my dad's name louder this time. But there was no sound, not even the shower running. So why wouldn't he be able to hear me? Something felt off. I started calling my dad's cell number and heard it vibrating in the bedroom down the hall. Maybe he was home after all. I went down the hall into my dad's empty room, and my heart dropped when I saw his phone vibrating on the nightstand next to his bed. Looking at the ground, I saw the melted snow tracks lead to his bathroom. The door was closed. I went over to knock on it and called out, "Dad," one final time. No response. I slowly opened the door, and the bathroom was empty. But something unusual caught my eye. The shower curtain was pulled shut. My dad always leaves the shower curtain open. On top of that, he usually keeps all doors open to make navigating easier for himself. I stared at the shower curtain for a moment, then closed the door and walked to the front of the condo. I shut the door and called 911. I waited at the front of the condo, the only entrance and exit, until the police arrived surprisingly quickly given the conditions. We went back inside together and right into my dad's room. where we found a man sitting on the bed with his hands in the air as if he had been expecting us. My dad arrived home about 10 minutes later, and I recounted everything that had happened. The man who broke in lived a few units down, according to his ID, meaning this man had been lurking in our neighborhood. As the police officers approached the man, I felt my heart stop. Everything had unfolded too quickly, and I couldn't believe a stranger had broken into my father's home. The intruder's face showed panic, but what worried me most was the question: why was he here? The officers apprehended him, and after some investigation, they revealed he had a criminal record. Although my father was unharmed, the shock left a lasting mark on my mind. I faced the deep fear that everything could have gone terribly wrong in an instant. In the end, my dad returned home safely, but the feeling of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the thought of how neglecting to lock the door could have led to a far worse situation. This was a valuable lesson I would never forget. If you've ever faced a similarly frightening situation or have a story of your own, please share it with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more chilling tales in the future. Thank you for watching Midnight Shadows. Remember, sometimes the darkest moments hold the most valuable lessons.